Your body did not begin carrying other people's pain simply because you were born more sensitive. It began because, very early, reading another person's condition became the shortest route to safety. The pain you carry is not always yours, but the carrying is. That is the part no one ever named for you. The pain came from outside. The system that receives it, who holds it, and does not know how to put it down was built from the inside, quietly, over years, without anyone asking whether you had agreed to become the room where other people's weather passed through. You call it empathy. You call it sensitivity. You call it being wired differently. These names are not wrong. They are simply incomplete. They describe the surface of something that began as a survival calculation and only later dressed itself in the language of a gift. Notice what your body does before you have decided anything. Someone walks into the room and your shoulders lift half an inch. A voice on the phone changes tone and your stomach tightens before the sentence finishes. A message arrives and the breath in your chest becomes shallow before your eyes have read a single word. This may feel like intuition, but much of it is also a trained response. Something in you began scanning for other people's states long before you had permission to have your own. The word empath makes you sound like a receiver, as if pain arrives from outside and passes through a person who happens to be more permeable than others. But permeability alone does not explain what your body does. If permeability were the whole story, the feeling might simply pass through. In you, it often stays. You feel and store. You feel and translate. You feel and, without deciding to, begin arranging your day around what the other person seems to need. That is more than sensitivity. That is a role. There was an arrangement when you were small that you may no longer remember consciously, but that your nervous system rehearsed until it became automatic. Someone in the room was not okay, and the room did not have space for two people to be not okay at once. Your body learned which one of you would carry it, not through words, through repetition, through the small, unremarkable evenings when the air in the house changed and your face changed with it before you understood why. You did not choose to become the barometer. You became the barometer because it was the only role available to you that seemed capable of keeping the room stable. And here is where the interpretation you have been given begins to fail you. You have been told you feel other people's pain because your energy is open. This makes the pain sound like something that simply arrives, but your body also goes out to meet it. Without your permission, it reaches beyond you and takes the temperature of everyone within range. Because your early life taught you that not knowing what someone else was feeling was more dangerous than knowing. The pain your body carries that was never its own was carried because once carrying it felt like the price of being allowed to stay. Look at what you do now. As an adult, in ordinary rooms, you walk into a gathering and within a minute you have located the person who is struggling. You did not decide to. Your attention simply went there. The way water finds the lowest point in a landscape, you spend the evening in a low current of awareness around that person, adjusting your face, softening your voice, becoming smaller or larger, depending on what seems to help. And when you leave, you are exhausted, yet you do not know why. Because on the surface nothing happened, something happened, You worked. The work is invisible because you have been doing it since before you had a name for it. It does not feel like effort. It feels like personality. It feels like who you are. And this is the deepest disguise the pattern has ever worn. It has convinced you that the labor is your nature. But if this were only your nature, why would an ordinary room exhaust you? Why would you need to lie down for 2 hours after a family dinner? Why would a headache begin the moment a certain relative arrived? What you call sensitivity may also be a body that has been quietly running a translation service for other people, and the translation service never learned that it was allowed to switch off. Through a Jungian lens, this is not simply an open channel. It is a complex and emotionally charged structure capable of organizing your adult reactions before conscious thought arrives. The complex formed around a very specific arrangement. Someone else's inner state was allowed to occupy the space. Yours was not, and in order to remain in the room, in order to remain loved, in order to remain useful, your attention learned to leave your own body and take up residence in theirs. The pain your body carries that was never its own is often still there because some part of you never fully returned home. You may want to argue with this. You may want to say that you do feel your own feelings, that you cry, that you grieve, that you know when you are angry, but notice, if you can, the delay. Notice how often you feel other people's states in real time and your own states 3 days later. Notice how quickly you can name what a friend needs and how long it takes you to answer when someone asks what you want for dinner. The lag is one kind of evidence, not that you have no inner life, but that your inner life was repeatedly postponed. It is still trying to catch up. There is a particular tiredness that belongs to this. It is not the tiredness of hard work. It is the tiredness of holding a shape. Your body has been holding a shape around other people's needs for so long that rest itself feels foreign. When you sit down alone, in silence, you may notice that your body does not know how to soften. It waits, it listens, it scans the empty room for a signal that is not coming. This is not simply restlessness. This is a body still on duty, unable to believe the duty has been lifted. You thought the sensitivity was a doorway to closeness. In some ways, it made you reliable. It made you understanding. It made you the person others wanted near them in hard moments. But look at who benefited from it. Look at the arrangement it produced. You knew them, but did they know you? You felt them, but did they feel you? You held their weather, but did anyone ever ask about yours? This is not an accusation. Most of them did not know they were being held. That is part of what the role does. It becomes so seamless that no one notices the labor underneath it. You have been carrying weight for people who genuinely believed the weight had simply vanished on its own. And here is the first turn that the surface story cannot hold. The pain your body carries that was never its own is not only pain you absorbed, it is pain your body learned, without words, to keep absorbing because some part of you feared that the moment you stopped, the room would change in a way you could not survive. The empath framework describes you as a receiver. It does not describe the bargain underneath the receiving. The bargain is where the real recognition begins. Something in you concluded, very young, that other people's emotional survival was your responsibility, not because you were noble, because taking responsibility kept you close to them, because a child who can regulate the adults around them is a child who does not get left alone inside an unregulated room. You did not develop this ability because you were spiritually chosen. You developed it because it worked. And what worked in childhood does not simply disappear when childhood ends. It follows you into your friendships, your marriages, your workplaces, and your parenting. It sits inside you as a low, constant hum of attention pointed outward. It is why you can tell when your partner is upset before they speak. It is why you know which colleague is having a hard week. It is why your children's moods land in your chest before they have finished walking through the door. You have been praised for this your entire life. Teachers called you mature, family called you the strong one, friends called you the one who understands, partners called you a safe place. Every reward reinforced the arrangement. Every reward made it harder to notice that you were not, in fact, safe yourself. The body that carries pain that was never its own is a body that has been rewarded for the carrying. That is the part that makes the pattern so difficult to see. You cannot easily grieve what everyone around you has been thanking you for, but your body has been trying to tell you, in the tightness that arrives without an obvious cause, in the exhaustion that does not match the day, in the strange grief that surfaces after ordinary conversations, in the moments when you sit in your car after leaving somewhere and cannot immediately drive, because something has to settle before you can move. This is not a mystery. This is the residue of a life spent translating feelings that were never yours to translate. And the residue is asking a question the older interpretation cannot answer. If the pain was never yours, why is it still here? The answer begins in a place the empath language cannot fully reach. The pain is still here because your body was never only a receiver. It became an archive, somewhere along the way. Without your knowledge, it stopped simply registering what passed through and began keeping what it had learned no one else was willing or able to hold. Think of the household you grew up inside, or the relationships that shaped your early adulthood. Notice what could be felt there but could not be named. A parent's exhaustion that no one discussed. A silence between two adults that thickened at dinner but was never explained. A sibling's fear that everyone stepped around. A grief that lived in the room but was never permitted a voice. In a family, what remains unspoken does not simply disappear. Often, it settles most heavily in the person who is most alert to the emotional atmosphere and least able to protest. Not consciously, not deliberately, but something in the arrangement places the unspoken weight inside the person most practiced at receiving it. That person was often you. Your body did not carry other people's pain merely because it was porous. It carried it because the family, the marriage, or the friendship could not hold that pain openly, and your body had learned to become the container that did not yet know how to refuse. This is how a complex develops over time. It does not simply trigger a reaction. It organizes perception, expectation, and behavior. It shapes a life around the reaction until the reaction becomes an architecture. Your empathy became part of that architecture. Whole areas of your attention were assigned to feelings that belonged to other people. And once assigned, They were not easily reclaimed. Consider what this arrangement made possible. It made you the person who could be told things. It made you the person others returned to when something broke. It made you the one who could sit with a friend in crisis and not flinch. It made you dependable in a way that felt almost magnetic. People sensed, without knowing how, that they could put something down beside you and it would be held. That safety they felt was real. It was also expensive. Often, when someone left your presence feeling lighter, your body remained activated by what had been spoken. They had finished the conversation. Your nervous system had not because you chose to absorb their pain, but because the old role continued working long after the conversation had ended and the room had become quiet. From a depth psychology perspective, the persona you built was not merely a social mask. It became a specialized adaptation. Persona is the form we take in order to move through the shared world and secure a place within it. Yours became unusually responsive. It could shift according to the room. It could soften around fragility, become firm around confusion, and brighten around sadness that seemed to need lifting. Others experienced this as generosity. Inside, it was labor so continuous that you stopped recognizing it as labor. And here is where the cost of the arrangement becomes visible. The persona capable of making room for everyone else began to obscure the person beneath it. There is only so much attention a nervous system can direct. Yours was directed outward for so long that your inward signals began to grow faint, not because they disappeared, but because you had learned not to treat them as urgent. In Jungian terms, whatever the persona excludes does not vanish. It moves toward the shadow. Your anger did not disappear. Your need did not disappear. Your exhaustion, your resentment, your wish to be protected, and even your desire to be cared for remained alive. They simply became more difficult to recognize as yours. You may have noticed this without having language for it. A friend tells you their entire life over coffee, asks nothing about yours, and you leave feeling full and empty at once. A partner unloads their day into your chest, rolls over to sleep, and you remain awake, carrying the emotional residue of a day that was never yours. A parent calls to speak about their worries, hangs up relieved, and you sit with the phone in your hand, wondering why your throat feels tight. The tightness is not mystical. It is your body registering that the contact has ended, but the emotional task has not. You have probably tried to name this before. You may have said that certain people leave you feeling drained. You may have looked for language in energy, boundaries, vibration, or giving too much. These languages are not useless. They describe the experience and may even offer temporary relief, but they do not fully describe the structure that keeps producing it. The structure was learned before memory. It directs your attention toward other people by default. Naming the exhaustion does not automatically retrain the pattern beneath it. What you are meeting is not only a boundary problem in the ordinary sense. It is a complex that organizes your adult life before conscious choice arrives. The complex says, quietly, that another person's inner state is more urgent than your own. It does not argue for this belief. It simply acts on it. By the time you notice, you have already adjusted your voice, your face, your schedule, and your attention. This is why the popular advice to establish better boundaries can feel almost impossible to follow. Boundaries assume a self standing on one side of a line, deciding what to let through, but you were often not located firmly inside your own experience. You were living inside the other person's condition, watching yourself from a distance. There was no stable line because there was no stable location from which to draw one. The empath framework has told you that you are too open. The deeper truth is that much of your attention has been living without your awareness at the wrong address. Now consider what this arrangement has preserved. It preserved your relationships in a very particular shape. It kept people close because you were useful to them in ways they could not always name. It softened conflict because you turned much of what could not be expressed inward. It kept you connected, but often connected through a specific function rather than through the full shape of your inner life. This is where the hidden bargain becomes visible. The bargain was that you would remain accessible as a receiver, and the relationship would not require either person to encounter your full inner world. It was not a conscious bargain, and it was not an equal one, but it operated from both directions. You wanted to be known, but you learned that being needed was safer than being known. Being useful was familiar. Being known would have required you to bring forward a self you were not yet sure you had permission to build. Notice how this changes the story. It is no longer only that other people took from you, it is also that a part of you came to depend on the arrangement, because the arrangement kept you inside a role you knew how to perform. The role gave you a place. Losing it would have meant standing in a room without a job, and that can produce a different kind of terror than exhaustion. You may feel resistance as you hear this. That resistance is worth listening to. It belongs to a persona that has protected you well and does not want to be described as protection. It wants to be described as your personality. It wants to be described as who you are. But notice what happens when someone in your life does not need you. Notice whether the connection becomes harder to locate. Notice the small confusion that can arrive when a friend is doing well for a long time and you become unsure how to enter their life. Notice how a relationship that stabilizes can begin to feel strangely flat. This is not because you wanted the other person to suffer. It is because your nervous system learned to recognize closeness through crisis, usefulness, and relief when no one is carrying anything. The old empath role does not know where to stand. This is one of the quiet costs of the pattern. It has made mutuality difficult to recognize. You know how to be with people in their pain. You know how to be with people in their need. But you do not always know how to be with people in ordinary presence, where nothing is demanded and nothing needs to be repaired, where two people simply exist together without a task between them. Ordinary presence can feel strangely exposed. There is space, but there is no function to organize it. This is also why solitude is so complicated for you. In solitude, there is no signal to scan. There is no emotional temperature to take. There is only your own weather. And your own weather is a country you have not fully lived in. Some part of you finds solitude relieving. Another part finds it unbearably quiet. Both are true. The relief comes from the old duty becoming silent. The unbearable quiet comes from discovering that you do not yet know what belongs to you when nothing is being poured in from outside. The pain your body carries that was never its own is not simply stored. The pattern of carrying has occupied inner space that might otherwise have developed around your preferences, your anger, your pleasure, your grief, and your unlived desires. But what feels empty is not evidence that there is no self inside you. It is the space where a postponed self has not yet been allowed to live. This is the layer the empath language often avoids. It is easier to be told that you receive the suffering of the world than to recognize that carrying the suffering of others has also protected you from encountering the life inside you that kept being postponed. The arrangement worked because it solved a problem you could not otherwise solve. It gave you belonging. It gave you a role. It gave you a way of being loved that asked for usefulness rather than self-knowledge. It kept your body continuously occupied. So the question of what you might feel if left alone did not have to be answered. But something in you has begun asking that question anyway. That is why these words feel uncomfortably familiar. Some part of you has grown tired of being inhabited by other people's weather. Some part of you is beginning to wonder what would remain in your chest if you stopped receiving on behalf of everyone in the room. And this is where the arrangement can no longer continue without taking something essential, because to keep carrying is to keep postponing. And the postponed self does not wait forever. The postponed self does not announce itself. It leaks. It appears in reactions that seem larger than the situation. It arrives in the sudden tiredness that follows a phone call you did not want to answer, in the involuntary flinch when someone says your name in a tone that expects something from you, and in the quiet, ashamed recognition after leaving a friend's house that you did not want to go and cannot remember when you stopped wanting to. You have been noticing these leaks for a while. You simply did not know what to call them. You called them moods. You called them being off. You called them needing more sleep. But they may have been the first signals from a self that had waited long enough. The signal your body is sending is not simply that you are absorbing too much. It is that the old role is beginning to refuse. And a role that has spent a lifetime being reliable does not always refuse politely. It may refuse through a heaviness that does not lift, a headache that begins before the family gathering, or the strange and unwelcome relief that appears when someone cancels. You may have felt that relief recently when a plan you had agreed to fell through. You may have noticed a small, private lightness that lasted for hours. You may also have felt guilty about it. The guilt is old. The lightness is new. The lightness is your body remembering what it feels like not to be scheduled to carry anyone. This is one of the costs that belongs specifically to a body trained to hold pain that was never its own. It is not simply that you are tired. It is that tiredness has become woven into your identity, and something inside that identity has begun to resent what it has been required to sustain. Notice where the resentment tries to land. It may land on a partner who leans on you, a parent who calls too often, a friend who never asks about your life, or a child who needs what children naturally need. You feel a flash of something dark toward them and immediately correct it. You reason it away and return to being the one who understands, who remains patient, who does not begrudge anyone anything. You have been correcting these flashes for so long that you may not remember when they began, but perhaps they have been arriving more frequently. Perhaps they are moving closer together. Perhaps they have become harder to soften. The idealized image of the empath has little room for this. It cannot easily accommodate the empath who is beginning to feel cold toward the people they have been holding. It cannot accommodate the sensitive person who sometimes no longer wants to feel. It calls this compassion fatigue, burnout, or a need for self-care. These names are not wrong. They are simply incomplete. They describe exhaustion, but they do not reach the older and more personal conflict underneath it. Here is the reversal that has been waiting through this entire descent. Maybe you did not carry other people's pain only because you were open to it. Maybe carrying it also gave you something you could not safely name. It may have given you a position from which you felt morally located. It may have offered a quiet sense of elevation in relationships where you otherwise felt unseen. The labor may have carried a hidden compensation. You were the one who understood. You were the one who could see what others could not. You were the one whose depth placed you slightly apart from the ordinary people around you who did not appear to feel as much. This is difficult to look at because you did not construct it consciously. You did not choose to feel elevated by your sensitivity, but the psyche often seeks compensation for a one-sided life. When the role could not be rewarded with mutual care, recognition, or rest, the compensation sometimes arrived as a slight and invisible elevation. The feeling that you noticed more, understood more, or cared more deeply than everyone else in the room. Look at how this may have shaped your relationships. Notice how often a friendship organizes itself around your capacity to understand the other person. Notice how rarely you allow yourself to be the one who does not understand, the one who feels confused, or the one who needs something ordinary that cannot be explained in a beautiful sentence. Notice how the elevation has isolated you inside your own kindness. One shadow of the empath is not cruelty. It is a subtle superiority that can become braided into compassion. It is the private thought, quickly suppressed, that other people simply do not feel the way you do. It is the way you may have quietly arranged the people around you into those who are more or less awake, more or less attuned, more or less capable of the depth you carry. You did not set out to become superior. You were trying to survive, and you were trying to give your suffering meaning. In a childhood where your inner life was not fully welcome, the psyche built a private country in which what you carried had value. You built that country because you needed somewhere to live. You have lived there for a long time, and the country has a border that keeps other people out even as maintaining it exhausts you. This is one reason closeness has been so complicated. Real closeness would require you to step outside that country. It would require you to be seen not only as the one who understands, but also as the one who sometimes does not understand and still needs something. It would require you to receive without first earning the receiving through emotional labor. Receiving without labor is a foreign transaction for you. Your body does not know how to accept what it did not first pay for. The pain your body carries that was never its own became the price of admission to a version of love in which being exceptional at caring felt safer than being ordinary in need. You could be needed without being fully known. You could be loved without allowing yourself to become small or uncertain in front of anyone. You could remain the depth in the room, and the depth in the room never had to admit to a loneliness without an elegant name. This is where the old arrangement begins to fail. The depth in the room has grown tired of being depth, not tired of feeling. but tired of the particular shape that feeling has always been required to take. Tired of an arrangement in which your interior life is welcome only when it is useful to someone else's process. Tired of translating what you feel into something the room can accept before you are permitted to feel it yourself. Underneath that tiredness, there is something the language of empathy rarely names. There is anger, not only the clean anger of injustice, but the untidy and morally inconvenient anger of someone who learned to maintain an arrangement they never consciously chose and now cannot easily leave. Anger at the people who accepted the arrangement without questioning it. Anger at the younger self who had to build it. Anger at the culture that praised the building. Anger arriving decades late, at moments when it no longer has a clear target. You have been afraid of this anger. You have feared that it would turn you into the very thing you spent your life being kind in opposition to. You have feared that it would spill onto the people you love. You have feared that it would prove your goodness was never real. It proves none of those things. Your goodness was real. At times, it also performed the work of a survival strategy. Two things can be true. The anger is not the collapse of your goodness. It is the return of a self that your goodness had been carrying for too long without acknowledgement. Through a Jungian lens, this is the shadow returning through the virtue. The virtue was your empathy. The shadow contained everything the identity built around empathy could not permit. The frustration you were not allowed to feel because it threatened the role. The judgment you could not name because naming it might make you resemble those who had judged you. The refusal you could not voice because voicing it might end the arrangement that kept you close to people you loved. The refusal has been forming anyway. It has been forming in the moments when you sit down to answer a message and cannot make yourself type. It has been forming when you look at your calendar and feel a quiet dread. It has been forming when someone begins describing their difficulty and, for the first time you can remember, your attention does not immediately leave you. It notices your own tiredness first. Then, embarrassed, it may move toward the other person anyway, but more slowly and with less of you disappearing inside it. You may have interpreted this as losing your empathy, becoming cold, or failing at the one thing that made you who you were. But this may not be the loss of empathy. It may be the attention that has been directed outward for a lifetime beginning to return home. It returns slowly and awkwardly, like someone entering a house they have not inhabited for many years. They do not immediately know where anything is. They stand in the doorway. They wait for the rooms to become familiar again. The pain your body carries that was never its own is beginning to have less room because your own life is finally requesting the space back. This is not comfortable. The postponed self does not arrive bearing gifts. It arrives with a backlog. It brings grief for the years it was not permitted to be present, feelings that do not immediately explain themselves, and preferences you did not know. You had that now contradict arrangements you have already made. And the arrangements notice, the people accustomed to the old version of you notice, not necessarily because they intended to exploit you, but because something in the familiar rhythm has changed, something in the way you answer, the way you arrive, and the way your voice sounds on the phone is no longer the same. The barometer is no longer taking their reading first. There is now a delay, small but unmistakable, between their weather arriving and your body responding. Inside that delay, something of you has begun to live. You cannot fully return to the old arrangement because you have felt the delay too many times to unfeel it. But you do not yet have a new arrangement to stand inside. You are between the old role and whatever comes after it. This is where the old bargains protest their ending and where the returning self has not yet learned to speak. The pain that was never yours is still in your body, but it is no longer the only thing there. The people who knew you through the role of the container may feel the change before you have language for it. They may not understand what they are feeling. They will simply notice that something is missing from the room when you enter. The old atmosphere you brought with you, the one that lowered their shoulders before they had spoken, the one that assured them their weather would be received, is no longer arriving in quite the same way. They may experience this as absence. Some of them will name it aloud. You have changed, they will say. You seem distant lately. I feel like I cannot reach you the way I used to. Or, more quietly, you do not seem like yourself. They are not lying. Something has changed. You are not distant in the way they mean, but you are no longer fully available in the way you once were. Your attention takes longer to leave you. The invisible interpretive work is no longer running in the background of every conversation. They can feel the difference even when they cannot explain it. Some of them may grieve this without knowing what they are grieving. They may call more often, needing something they cannot name. They may bring up old memories in which you were more clearly the person who understood. They may tell stories about the version of you who seemed easier to reach. They are not necessarily doing this to punish you. They are missing an arrangement they never had to notice while it was working. The arrangement was largely invisible because the labor took place inside your body, not theirs. Now that your body is performing less of that labor, the arrangement becomes visible for the first time. Its ending may feel to them like something you are doing against them. You may feel guilty about this. The guilt is old. It is the guilt that kept the arrangement in place for decades. It says that if another person is uncomfortable, you have failed. It says that if someone is grieving, you must return to the shape that made them comfortable. The old guilt does not distinguish between hurting someone and no longer serving them in a way that was never sustainable. To the guilt, these feel identical. They are not identical, and your body has begun to know the difference, even when your mind is still trying to translate. Some relationships may not survive this, not because you deliberately end them, but because they were organized around an arrangement that required you to remain a particular shape, and that shape has begun to move. The people inside those relationships may continue speaking to the role. They may continue expecting the role to answer. When it does not, they may fail to recognize the person standing behind it, waiting to discover whether they can be met without performing their old function. You may find yourself quieter in rooms that once required your constant attentiveness. You may be less quick to reach for the softening word, the smoothing sentence, or the gentle interpretation that once arrived automatically. For the first time, you may allow a silence to remain without rushing to fill it with your understanding of what another person must be feeling. This is not necessarily coldness. It is the return of a self that has decided, without ceremony, that it will no longer explain everyone to themselves before giving its own experience the same attention. Other people may surprise you. Some will welcome the change. not because they wanted to lose the care you offered, but because they sensed that the person offering it was not always fully present. They did not want only what you could provide. They wanted to meet whoever existed behind the providing. These people may meet the new distance with relief. They may not speak about it directly, but once you stop working so hard around them, you will experience their presence differently. You will lose some intimacy that was built on the old currency. You will also encounter forms of intimacy you did not know were available. The exchange may not feel fair for a long time. The losses will be concrete. The gains will be quiet. This is one of the ordinary sorrows of returning to yourself. What ends is immediately legible. What begins is not yet loud enough to name. There will be moments when you miss the old version of yourself. You will miss the certainty of knowing your role in every room. You will miss the way people looked at you when you were the depth in the conversation. You may even miss the private country where everything you carried gave you a location, even if that location was lonely. Missing the role does not mean you should return to it. The role provided something real. Its ending is therefore a real loss, and that loss is allowed to be grieved. You may also miss the pain itself. This is stranger to admit. The pain that was never yours had become a familiar tenant. It occupied areas of your inner life that are now, perhaps for the first time in decades, becoming available. That new space will not immediately feel peaceful. It will feel unfamiliar. Some part of you may instinctively search for something else to carry, simply because carrying has been the only shape your interior has known. This is where the old bargain makes another offer. It will suggest a new person to hold, a new cause to absorb, or a new relationship in which someone needs you enough to make the unfamiliar space disappear. The offer will be tempting. Refusing it may feel, inside your body, like refusing love itself, but you are not refusing love. You are refusing the arrangement that made being needed the condition of receiving it. From a depth psychology perspective, you are not becoming less loving. You are becoming less willing to accept forms of love that require your disappearance. This is differentiation, not isolation. It is one of the quiet beginnings of individuation, learning to remain psychologically distinct enough to encounter another person without abandoning yourself inside them. Your relationships may become fewer, slower, and quieter. At first, this may feel like a smaller life, but if you can bear the unfamiliar space, it may gradually become a life that has room for you inside it, which the larger life never did. The pain your body carried that was never its own has not vanished. Some residue may remain. Bodies do not surrender their histories all at once, but the pain no longer has to organize your entire inner world. It can become one experience among others. Inside a body that is slowly remembering what belongs to it and what has merely passed through. You may not always know whether a feeling arriving in your chest began in you or in someone else. That distinction, which the empath language treats as urgent, may begin to matter less. What matters is whether you are allowed to remain inside your own experience while the feeling is present. The empath framework told you to protect yourself from other people's emotions, but the deeper movement is not only protection, it is residency. It is learning to live inside your own body as its rightful occupant, even when another person's pain is nearby. The people capable of loving you as a person will learn this residency alongside you. They will learn that you will not always know what they are feeling. Sometimes you will ask instead of intuiting. Sometimes you will need them to say the thing aloud because your body is no longer performing the interpretive labor that once spared them the effort. Some people will find this difficult. Others will find it a relief because they never wanted to be interpreted. They wanted to be known, and being known requires speaking. Speaking requires another person who is present beside you, not already inside your experience doing the emotional work for you. You will not become someone who feels nothing. You will become someone whose attention begins inside their own body and reaches outward from there, rather than someone whose attention begins in the room and reaches their own body last. This reordering will not be dramatic. It is not the clean empowerment story the culture likes to tell about sensitive people. It is a slower reorganization of the direction in which your attention moves. Some nights, alone in the quiet, you will notice something small, a preference arriving without translation, a tiredness naming itself as your own without first consulting anyone else's schedule, a sadness that belongs only to you, not on loan from anyone and not carrying anyone else's name. These arrivals will seem modest. They are not modest. They are the first messages from an interior that has waited its entire life to be addressed as itself. The pain your body carried that was never its own was carried for reasons that once made sense. It kept you close to people you did not yet know how to reach in any other way. It gave you a role in rooms that might not otherwise have made space for you. It helped you remain connected when you had few other options. You can look at the life built around that role with compassion, not because the arrangement was fair, but because the younger self who created it was trying to keep you here. You do not have to condemn that earlier self in order to stop repeating what it learned. The pain is no longer the price of remaining here. You no longer have to pay for your place with your body. Slowly, perhaps for the first time, the body that carried everyone else is beginning to carry you.